I met my wife through coworkers 1 year after I got the job. I was 24 and she was 23. We fell for each other right away and maintained good rapport with everyone in the office through years of our relationship. We got married and had 2 kids. After our kids were born, my wife started working from home. When they left for college, I planned on starting a new hobby with my wife. We were still in the midst of deciding what to do when her lies became revealed. I arrived home from work late again on one particularly horrible day, exhausted because I had to endure a painfully awkward budget meeting involving a coworker that fancies me. She asked me more questions than anyone else during the meeting, and the way she looked at me as she spoke made everyone else in the room wonder what her intentions were. However, I was a married man that loved his wife dearly and respected the laws of marriage. So even when this woman entered my office to properly ask me out on a date, I kindly declined and showed her my wedding ring. She was surprised and apologized, claiming that she didn't notice my ring before. She said she was going through a divorce herself with someone else in the office. She invited me to call her if I ever felt like getting out of the house for a few hours. Fast forward a few months from that day to the day I arrived home from the meeting, where she was clearly still attempting to get my attention. I walked straight up the stairs to our bedroom like I always do, pushing the door open to find my wife having sex with a man from my office. I involuntarily screamed, which made my wife start yelling in alarm and sent the intruder flying out of our house. Hardly thinking about it, I heaved my briefcase at his head, hitting him repeatedly with it as he scrambled to get off my wife. When he managed to stand up, I dropped the briefcase to punch him in the face. My wife ran out of the room and 2 seconds later along with her AP. He must have driven home with just his boxers on because his clothes were still on the floor. I sat on the floor in disbelief at what I had just seen. My wife came back into the room, then just cried and apologized, unsure of what else to say. What could she say? I literally walked in on her cheating on me. Eventually, I found the strength to stand up, glaring at my soon-to-be ex as she cleaned up around our bedroom. She was making herself busy because she was waiting for me to tell her what was going to happen. Funny how dependent she seemed on my word, given the situation. I already knew who she was sleeping with and planned on firing him immediately. It was then that I remembered it was the same man my flirtatious coworker named as her soon-to-be ex. As I choked back tears, I asked her why she did it. She said she didn't know and that perhaps she was getting bored with our sex life. I told her that wasn't a good enough excuse and that she should have told me how she felt or suggested we try something new. We could have overcome it if she gave us the chance. Well, just as I feared, it turned out this affair was going on for some time. Without my wife's knowledge, I told her parents what was going on. They wouldn't allow her to come live with them, so I decided to stay in my parents' guest house until I could prove her infidelity in court. I was worried about how I was going to prove it, but that's when my flirty coworker came to my rescue. After I told her I found her soon-to-be ex with my wife, she explained that she was divorcing him because of videos and incriminating texts she found on his computer. They were all between him and a woman she didn't know, but now she knew it was my wife. She apologized that I was going through the same thing as her and that she couldn't have warned me sooner. She provided me with copies of the incriminating evidence to use in court against my wife. As my wife moved into the small and filthy apartment she could afford, her infidelity in our marriage was proven and the divorce was finalized. She expressed her constant emotional torment and desire to take back everything she had done. Our adult children and her parents haven't spoken to her or visited her. Thankfully, I'm still managing my department at work and quite well off. My children visit me often, and we've all managed to create a new life that doesn't involve my ex-wife or the sorrow that she could have brought upon us. OP, I'm so sorry you went through this. It's so fortunate that things worked out the way they did. You're a wise man made wiser by having to endure this life challenge. She used the poor and selfish excuse of boredom to betray you and break her marital vows. She was well aware of what she was doing, and you most likely did the best thing you could have done by divorcing her so you could move on with your life. Although your children were adults, it's apparent that what she did affected them as well. Thank goodness you've all managed to create a new normal and live a happy life. I wish you all the best of luck and good fortune. Now for today's second story. My wife was 35 and I was 36 when she was informed of an upcoming high school reunion. We arranged for a babysitter for that night and immediately started looking forward to it. I wouldn't know anyone, but it was really exciting for me to get to meet her old friends. I met my wife one fateful night in a bar that was on the same street we worked on. She worked as a hairdresser, and I worked in a print shop. The first thing I noticed was how beautiful her hair was. Then I saw her eyes, and I knew she was going to be a fascination of mine for an unimaginable length of time. The first thing she said to me was that I needed a haircut, but I'm getting off topic. We were married and welcomed 2 kids into the world. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and there were a few times we considered taking time apart, but as soon as it came time to pack a bag, neither of us could do it. There wasn't any infidelity at this point, so it felt like any disagreement or issue could be resolved and worked through. That's how marriage is supposed to work, isn't it? Our kids had a good childhood and never had to hear loud arguments. They were 13 and 16 when we started planning to attend her high school reunion. 2 weeks before the reunion, my wife added many high school friends to her Facebook. More than one of these were men, but most of them were married as well. I had no suspicions of anything until I heard the dings start. Multiple times throughout the time we were home from work together, I heard her phone ding. I started thinking I heard it when I was in the shower or on the toilet. I heard it while she was cooking, and as we said goodnight to our kids. It was getting obviously excessive, and she knew it. I finally asked her who was messaging her so often, and of course she said it was high school friends talking about the reunion. Fair enough. She put her phone on vibrate, so it seemed like the messages suddenly stopped. After she fell asleep one night, I heard her phone vibrate. I stared at the ceiling for 30 minutes before I heard it again and gave in. What I read was unnerving. It was a string of messages between her and a man that would be at the high school reunion. In one of the messages, she mentioned how wonderful and exciting it will be to see him again. In another, she asked if any fun he'd had over the years compared to what they did when they were young. He replied that no, he was only able to have that level of fun with her. She responded to that by saying that perhaps they'd have fun at the reunion or sometime after that. He pointed out that this sounded like she'd want to keep seeing him after the reunion, and she didn't deny it. Well, I confronted her about it, and she apologized profusely. She said he seemed lonely and like he needed friends. I told her this was no excuse to be talking to him about having fun or continuing to see each other after the reunion. I also asked if they'd been intimate in the past, and she said no. She didn't appear to be lying, but knowing what I know now, I'd say she most definitely was. She asked me if we could still go to the reunion, and I said yes, figuring she hadn't really broken my trust at this point, and I'd be there to watch everything. Little did I know she continued talking to that man, maybe even more than before. She had her hair and nails done before the night out. During the night in question, it took the man a few minutes to get up the nerve to reintroduce himself to my wife while I stood beside her. I hated the feeling he gave me. He could barely look at me, and I could see how desperate he was to connect with my wife. She looked at him similarly, but with more care about me. She introduced me kindly, but that didn't faze this man. He sat close enough to maintain conversation with her, and throughout the night, everyone drank except me. My wife was visibly intoxicated by the time I had to go to the bathroom. I told her I'd be right back. When I came back out, she was gone, and so was he. I looked around and asked one of the women from the reunion where they went. She said they stepped outside for a cigarette. My wife didn't smoke, but I thought maybe she just stepped outside to keep him company. When I went outside, I didn't see them anywhere. I checked the inside of all the cars in the parking lot. I tried calling her cell phone and she didn't answer. I was stumped and angry. I waited 45 minutes before finally getting a text from her. It read that she'd agreed to go with the man to the gas station down the road, but since they were close to our house, he was planning to drop her off there. I knew this was bullshit. I arrived home 10 minutes later to find that the babysitter had left and our kids were asleep. My wife was asleep on the couch, wearing only her panties. I woke her up immediately and demanded an explanation. She was so out of it, but honestly, a part of me believed she was faking it. In her incomprehensible way, she tried to say that he gave her a ride home because he wanted to talk about stuff he was going through. Trying to get more out of her while she was like this was impossible, so I waited until the morning. Before she woke up, our teenagers told me about the night they had with the babysitter. I could hardly pay attention, but it was good to know they were asleep when she arrived home and didn't see anything odd. As soon as my wife got up, I asked her about what happened. She complained that her memory was shot and said she felt really bad. Really bad for leaving me there and really bad for getting so drunk. Well, a few hours later, she broke down and told me she just remembered what really happened. I think she just knew I was going to find out somehow. She told me he asked her to come outside with him and talk, and she agreed. He invited her into his car because it was cold, and she didn't see the harm in that. Then she said he forced her to kiss and have sex with him. She was crying, but I swore it was because she was caught. I told her to let me check her phone, and she tried to refuse and make excuses. I grabbed it from her and locked myself in the bathroom. Lo and behold, she had time to text the man and say what they did was a mistake. But before that, days before the reunion, messages proved they planned to sneak away at some point, have sex, and even considered the possibility of her spending the night at his house. This was it. Our marriage was over. When I opened the bathroom door, she was ghostly white and staring at me as if her life depended on it. I told her we were done, that I wouldn't be able to be with her again, knowing she planned and went through with cheating on me. She sobbed and almost inaudibly pleaded for my forgiveness. I told her that although she was drunk when it happened, she planned this out beforehand. She decided to give herself away, even though she was faithfully mine for all these years. I lost all motivation to protect her as my wife because she chose to invite another man in. I didn't think she could feel any worse, but she did after I said that. She curled up in a ball, crying her heart out while I did her a few favors. I arranged for the kids to have a sleepover at their friend's house so that they may not be as traumatized later in life. I packed as much of my wife's clothes and belongings as possible. I called her parents and informed them of what was happening, suggesting they come pick up their daughter. They did. Since she refused or was unable to get in their car, I put her in, followed by her stuff. Her parents tried to apologize to me and talk about it, but I didn't acknowledge them beyond hello and goodbye. My wife tried more than once to get out of the car, but they warned her that if she didn't come with them now, they wouldn't allow her to stay with them until she found somewhere else to go. Hearing that sent her into a trance. She knew her life as she knew it was over. She sat still like a statue as they drove her away. Through the divorce and custody hearings, she was crying as silently as possible. Our teens chose to live with me, continuing to live in the same house and attend the same school. Their mom had the decency to admit her wrongdoing and with me to the best of her ability. Since years have passed, I'm able to basically be friends with her. I'm thankful to myself every day that I didn't stay with her and try to work it out. It would have been so much worse for me, better for her. She chose this path and I went willingly. She hated it every step of the way, but maybe she deserved that. She's still living with her parents, even though she's moved out more than once since all this happened. I guess she's had trouble finding happiness after her family life ended. I remarried 1 year ago, and she's a wonderful, faithful woman so far. I wanted to share my story so that others going through some horrible life-altering reality will maintain hope. OP, sharing your story will certainly spread hope that anyone can find a future for themselves beyond what they've known. Unfamiliar doesn't have to be intimidating. We're only human after all, and wouldn't have to face anything we aren't strong enough for. That being said, I'm sorry that you've experienced this betrayal. Even when reality sank in, you stuck with the decision you needed to make for yourself. It can be extremely difficult to see past emotions and what you've become accustomed to. But when someone has broken trust like this, sometimes the only option is to start over new. Rely on yourself, family, friends, and professionals for support and advice. There's always a way to keep moving forward in life. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish nothing but good fortune for you and your kids. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.